Сайн байцгаана уу хүнд үзэгчдээ. Өнөөдөр манай Defacto нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор Норвегийн Эрдэмтэн, Норвегийн Neuroscience сургуулийн профессор 2014 онд энэ Neuroscience-аар энэ мэргэжлэр Нобелийн шагнал хүртсэн эрхэм Эдвард Мозер оролцож байна.
Эдвард Мозер, Нобелийн шагналт тархи судлаач профессор. Эдвард Мозер Ослогийн их сургуулийг төгссөн ба 1995 онд тархи судлалын чиглэлээр докторийн зэрэг горилжээ. Тэрээр Норвеги улсын шинжлэх ухааны технологийн их сургуулийн тархи судлалын кавлын хүрээлэнгийн захирал бөгөөд Норвегийн шинжлэх ухааны академийн гишүүн, Норвегийн эзэн хааны академийн гишүүн, Норвегийн технологийн шинжлэх ухааны академийн гишүүн юм. Эдвард Мозер орон зай мэдрэхүйн тархины бүтэц, физиологийн механизм чиглэлээр судалгаа хийдэг, Нобелийн шагнал, Европын шинжлэх ухааны Корберийн шагнал, Норвегийн эзэн хааны шагнал болох гэгээн Олафын одон гүн цолоор тус тус шагнагджээ.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for being with us. Please tell us what happened today. You had a very busy day.
Yeah, it's an exciting day. So in the morning I participated in a symposium, gave one of 3 public lectures about the brain. My lecture was about how we find our way and also how the brain experiences time. So later in the day I also participated in a panel discussion. So with the involvement of an audience here at the university, where we discussed how can neuroscience or brain sciences be built up in Mongolia. Is there a future for this area? Why would one want neuroscience in Mongolia? And how can you stimulate people to take a future? And so it has been a busy day, done lots of things, all compressed in one day.
Mm-hmm. And during just that short period, you were able to talk to Mongolian scientists, audiences about, as you said, why this neuroscience is important to develop for each country, including Mongolia. Why is that so?
So I think the reason why, first of all, neuroscience is important to study because so many diseases depend on the brain. So in every country, including Mongolia, many of the diseases have a basis in the brain. So that includes neurology and psychiatry. So then one may ask, maybe this can be, that research better takes place in rich countries, in the US or in Europe. But I would say, no, that's not enough, because it is important that health professionals, that medical doctors know the research that is the basis for their treatments. They need to know how the knowledge has been acquired, and they have to learn to be critical. What is good knowledge? What is not good knowledge? And you can only do that if you actually have personal experience with research. So that's why I think at some scale it is important that sciences are performed locally as well, and especially then for brain sciences, because so many diseases involve the brain.
What you're saying is, for training of people with knowledge or skills, it's important to know which one has more efficiency, because there is between the very necessary and not very necessary knowledge, right?
Yes, I would say that not only with efficiency, but also and there is good research and there's bad research. So some research can really be trusted because it has been performed very carefully, and you can really take the results as facts. And other research maybe suffers from problems, so that an alternative interpretation would be more valid. And you have to, I mean, in order to use these results, you also have to be able to distinguish the good from the bad. You have to be critical, and that you can only do by training.
By training, for that our neuroscientists they are to study the brain, how does it work, which part is to, then, I mean, is it, I thought it's a work of the developed nations, how a country of this middle income can do deeper. What is the local specifics of that?
I think research can be performed at many levels. So I think the most important is that health professionals have some understanding of scientific methods. So having just experience in performing research is already a lot. But you can perform research at the very expensive level, like I do in my own lab. Equipment costs a lot and can only be performed in some places. But it's also very well possible to perform important work at much lower costs, where you, for example, you can use the natural resources. You can use, for example, people with diseases, psychiatric diseases, neurological diseases, then test how do they function in this or that situation, so that you don't necessarily need a lot of resources. So I think the type of research is maybe not the most important. It's just that to keep health professionals involved in some sort of science so that they know the method and know how knowledge is acquired.
As you said, many disease comes from the brain, the way it works. So for a country like Mongolia, the scientists, when they study deeper, Mongolian scientists, will they have particular useful data extract from those research for further treatment of those people, compared to they say take the radio result of their research from developed nations?
Yeah, without knowing exactly what the Mongolian population has of diseases, I still think that every country has its own profile of diseases, which depends on the way people live. So how people interact with each other, their support system, social support system, and also what they eat, how much they move, and so on. So every country is different, and that's also a reason why it is important to have scientists who actually are from Mongolia, who actually know the local differences and not only use the average that comes from the developed countries.
I understand you were invited by Mongolian neuroscientists. Their association is active here. Well, what kind of connections you have?
Sorry, what?
What kind of connections you have with this Mongolian association?
Oh, well, the connection is only that they invited me. I thought that was an exciting opportunity to visit the country and to speak to people who I was told they am the first, at least, Nobel laureate in medicine or physiology who's been here. And I think that expectation was certainly fulfilled, because there was so much excitement in the audience about the visits, both by me and the two others. So, but I have had no connection before, because it is, after all, a very small society.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I know.
Okay. At the end, your research work, and it is a result, will recognize it by this Nobel Committee of Prize for, as it is, you have found out the particular, as I understand, particular cells in the brain that helps coordination of positioning of a person. Please tell us about that a bit in a simple way.
Yes. So the work is for what they call the brain's positioning system. So this is how the brain helps us find our way, how we know where we are, how we can get from one place to another. And if that doesn't work, why do we get lost? What we have found is that there are a number of specialized cells in the brain that help us map our own location in space. And the cell type that got the most attention and for which we got the Nobel Prize is a cell type we call the grid cell. So grid cells are called grid cells because these cells are active in certain locations. So when I walk around in this room, for example, a grid cell in my brain would be active only when I'm here and there, and there. But those places where these are active, they form a very regular pattern. It's a triangular or hexagonal pattern. So it's almost like a coordinate system where you see the intersections of lines.
It's so this photography each moment.
Exactly.
Separate.
And this then helps us calculate distances and directions so we can find our position in the room.
Quite technical.
Yeah, it's quite technical, quite sophisticated, but for the brain apparently this is the most functional solution.
In which lobe that system is existing, in 4 of all of them, or in particular lobe?
Oh, it is in the medial temporal lobe. So it's on the sides of the brain.
It's a kind of parietal lobe?
In the medial temporal.
Okay, lobe. Medium temporal, on 2 sides?
On 2 sides, one on each side.
Okay, and so these, let's a little bit explaining about the cells, how do they work? Yeah. People interested just now in a simple way to understand. Understand the brain is consisting of so many senses, and like computer, it's processing information and immediately reacting back, right? Yes. Hot things, immediately I take it back, my hand. So some people have a brain disease, so-called, right? Something, not coordination, cerebral disease, for example, not speaking clearly, right? Though brain works well, but expression doesn't work, etc. So your discovery, in which way they help to address these diseases?
Yeah, I would like to give 2 answers. So the first answer is that this research is what we call basic research. So we try to understand the normal brain, and the reason for understanding the normal brain is that I see that as a condition for understanding diseases of any kind. So if you know how the brain works at a very fundamental level, then we have the necessary information for both understanding and treating diseases of all kinds, the whole spectrum of neurology and psychiatry. So that's my first answer. It's the general knowledge. But the second answer is that these areas of the brain that I study, they're called the hippocampus and the entorhinal cortex. They happen to be the very first areas of the cortex where the cells die in Alzheimer's disease. So in Alzheimer's disease, the first cell death happens in the hippocampus and in the entorhinal cortex. And that explains, because hippocampus and entorhinal cortex are important for finding your way and for memory. And if you lose hippocampus and entorhinal cortex, you get lost, you can't find your way, and you lose memories. So that's exactly the symptoms in early stages of Alzheimer's disease. So there is a connection between this work on grid cells and the Alzheimer's disease. What the connection is, we don't know yet, but it's certainly an area that is has to be researched.
But that Alzheimer's disease, for example, for practicality of our conversation, starts not in brain, or how does it work? I mean, where does it start? How it's affect?
Yeah, so we know that it starts very early on with cell death in these brain areas for spatial navigation and memory. Why the cells die, that we don't know. No one knows. There's something about these cells that makes them very sensitive, but we don't know why. And that also means that because we don't know why, there's also no treatment. There's no treatment that is functional at the moment.
They keep promising something recently that they will do it, etc. It's not very
One
true.
has to be patient. So people have, scientists have looked for a treatment for Alzheimer's disease now for several decades, and there are many ideas around, many suggested treatments, but none of them really work. But that shouldn't make us give up, because the only way to find a solution to Alzheimer's is to do research. There's no other way we can find it.
What you're saying is there is no clear, approved way of treatment of the Alzheimer's disease?
Not at the moment.
Okay, it is very tragic way of forgetting, or I mean, your life is lost. you die at the end without knowing anything what's happening,
Yes.
except few people you know.
Yes.
But with the age, people start to forget. Memory is not working as usual before. And when we were younger, once you learn, you never forget the names. You know exactly where you have met this person. But with the age, it doesn't work. Why?
Yeah.
It is again this health issue, or what?
Yeah, no, so there is some memory of forgetting with age too, but there are also changes in the nature of memory as people get older. So you may forget many details, but you still have more general insight type of memory or knowledge, which often is an advantage and which persists very late. So I still think most people see Alzheimer's disease as something different from normal aging. With normal aging, you may forget a little bit, but still you're functioning pretty well, and it's all okay. But with Alzheimer's disease, then everything is lost in the end. So it's really tragic.
So with normal aging, as you said, you find it is normal to forget some part of it.
Yeah, a little bit, for sure.
How big it can be allowed, or how you can tolerate until you have a alarm, no, you cannot go in this way.
Yeah, no, that's hard to say. I mean, it's a bit fuzzy border, but still many people are worried about forgetting a little bit at old age, and that's just normal. So, but of course, if the forgetting is severe and if it goes along with inability to find one's way, getting lost, that may be a concern, and one would have to watch out. So,
if there is a particular treatment is created for, say, the cells, the nerve system, maybe a little bit getting kind of not fragile, getting a little bit tougher, or getting kind of weird out.
Yeah,
there is a particular outstanding treatment to these diseases.
No, not a particular treatment, but it always helps to keep one's brain active. So you can be active in 1,000 different ways, but I mean, intellectually or physically or anything helps. So do different things all the time. So there are studies with rats and mice which show that if you compare rats that live in a big cage with lots of toys and can climb and jump around, and compare them with rats that just live in a simple cage with nothing inside, then those who live in the big cage with lots of toys, they get many, many more connections between the cells. And so if this can be generalized to humans, so you have a rich life full of experiences, perhaps you get a richer brain network too. And although that may not prevent Alzheimer's disease, it may perhaps help you live a little bit longer before the disease makes a difference.
Different experiences, meaning probably traveling and or maybe trying to different movement of sports, for example, dancing.
Yes,
whatever.
anything. Yes.
So it has a background that it helps, because that's what people say.
Yeah, yes.
How about,
be active. Yeah.
I mean, you have been all your life studying cells, and you are the right person to ask about the cells. What is their behavior, etc. How does alcohol impact on the cells?
Well, too much alcohol is never good. That kills.
Well, too much and a little bit. What?
Yeah, but a little bit is probably. I like to believe that a little bit is okay. So, and I think you need to have large amounts before it really kills too many cells. But so I think you can also see that in societies where people have moderate uses of alcohol, actually sometimes they live even longer. So I think it is a question of amounts. That's all what it's about.
Please tell us, what was a day, a news, when you have learned now you won the Nobel Prize? What was your feeling? How it happened?
Yeah, so what happened was that I was actually on a plane. I was flying from Norway to Germany, to Munich, and I had completely forgotten that this was the day when the prize would be announced. So I was totally unprepared for it. And then they announced it while I was in the plane. So everyone else knew, but I didn't know.
So because no connection on
No
the plane.
connection, no.
So you have landed in Munich.
Yeah,
What
and then
happened
I
at the
landed.
airport?
And then I came to the airport, and then at the exit of the plane, there was a person with flowers for me. And then I asked, why do I get flowers? And this person had forgotten why, or I wasn't able to say it at least. So I still didn't understand anything. And then started checking my mobile phone, and then saw that there were 300 messages and phone calls and everything. And then I saw the name of the secretary of the Nobel Committee and knew the name. So then I started to make the connection.
Wow. So
But that was a crazy day.
And I understand this Nobel Prize was given to you, to your wife, and another scientists.
Yeah, John O'Keefe.
Yes. How was their reaction?
No, so I think we were all quite surprised because we knew that we were probably on the short list because we had been invited several times to Stockholm, and they have this symposia, and then if you're invited frequently there, then at least people like to believe that there's some
Studies going on. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know, but at least we consider that might happen sometime, maybe in 20 years. But then the year before, the prize was also given to neuroscience for people who work on the connections between cells. And then we thought, all of us, that well, they don't give it to brain science 2 years in a row. No way. So I should forget that.
Do you feel yourself German or Norwegian? Or how does it work?
No, I feel mostly like a Norwegian. Yeah, because I've lived in Norway all my country, so all my life. My parents came from Germany, but that was before I was born. So
you were born in Norway.
In Norway.
But your father, mother were German.
Yeah, they both.
What was your native language there?
First language was Norwegian.
Norwegian.
Yeah.
Why it would be when your parents was German?
Yeah, no, they wanted me to speak Norwegian, so they had decided they wanted to stay in Norway. So
you speak German though?
Well, a little bit. I understand German quite well, but I'm out of practice.
I see. There is another, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, there was a certain tendency that German doctors, neuroprofessionals, were a lot going to the Scandinavia.
Yes.
What was that about?
Well, in Scandinavia, and especially in Norway, there were not enough doctors, especially in the north. In the north of Norway, it's the more remote parts, where it was quite difficult to get doctors, so there were open positions everywhere. And I think that probably attracted people, and people also wanted to have Norwegian or Germans or anyone who could easily learn the language to come up. Because German and Norwegian languages are quite similar. I mean, you have to make an effort to learn the other language, but it's not very, very difficult.
Plus salary was way higher because the tax or...
Yeah. Salaries were probably higher, but the taxes were also higher.
So now, a lot of talk is going on. Scandinavian countries have big taxes, but people like to pay, and because they have what to take in the return.
So healthcare and all that.
How do you feel about that?
Hmm?
Is that everybody has a free healthcare?
Yes. Yeah, everyone has free healthcare up to some point. You have to pay a little bit, but it's not much. So once you pass a certain limit, the rest is taken care of by the government.
Do you regard yourself as a doctor or as a scientist?
As a scientist. So my training is actually in psychology originally. I'm not a medical doctor. But then I became, my work and my degree is from a medical institute. So institute, what we call Institute for Neurophysiology at that time. So I'm a kind of hybrid, but still my background is from psychology. And that's why I'm interested in behavior.
You also studied at the University of London.
And no, so my studies were from the University of Oslo in Norway, but then I had a short period, actually only 3 months in London, with O'Keefe, who also got the prize. He was actually my mentor. And then that's where we learned the techniques, how to perform these recordings from brain cells in the hippocampus.
So as a scientist then, I mean, you were obviously very consistent towards these directions to understand more about the brain cells, how all this work together. And at the end, what you have done with your colleagues, really helping people to understand deeper, and obviously good contribution towards treatment of some diseases. Yeah. What is the most important, you think, character for people who wants to live and work in science?
Yeah, for people who want to do a future in science, yes. I think there are several characteristics that are important. So maybe the first one is curiosity. You really need to be determined. You need to want to find out how things work, but you also need a good portion of patience, because experiments take years. So you don't do an experiment and next day you have the answer. So that's not the way it works. So you have to do the experiment over and over again. You have to change and then try in a new way, and then it doesn't work. Then you do it in a different way, and finally you get it to work. But this may take several years quite often. So I would say patience is important. And nowadays it's also important to be able to collaborate, because science is getting so complex that no single individual can do it alone anymore. So you have to do it together with people. So you have to have teams of people who are complementary and can help each other, and then produce something that is bigger than anyone alone can do.
That means more networking, more writing, printing, publishing, so that they know what are you doing, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of networking and interaction, so that publishing is one of it. But also just meeting people at conferences, talking to them. I think it's important. The important is always to the quality of the work. So I think it's always more important to do one thing really, really well than doing 10 things just half well. So that's always my guiding principle. Just focus and try to do it as well as possible. Take the time that is needed instead of quantity, because there is so much research already that no one can follow all of it anyway.
What is the connection of, I'm asking about the R&D. What you do is how much is connected with industry, with business, with the pharmaceutical companies? Yes. How does it work, the connection?
So, I mean, what I do is primarily called basic research. That means that it's fundamental. We just want to understand the brain. But nonetheless, neuroscience is connected to industry because it opens up opportunities. And those opportunities are, for example, related to treatments of diseases. So Alzheimer's disease is one. So there's an enormous potential for industry if they find a treatment that helps, especially against Alzheimer's disease, because there are so many who have it, but also the whole spectrum of psychiatric diseases. And I think another area where maybe brain sciences may become more important in the future is that the development of artificial intelligence, AI, can learn a lot from the ways that problems are solved by the brain. Yes. And that may actually, yeah, they do it, right?
They kind of a copy of a brain. How, if you say 100%, the brain, the way the brain works, how today's level of AI, how many percent of the brain is made by this already?
Well, it's hard to say. So the progress in AI today is enormous. So we know computers can understand language, can translate language. You have self-driving cars, and computers can recognize faces. So many isolated functions can be performed by AI alone. But still, I think it's a long way from that to actually fitting it all together. So I think that's the human brain will still be superior there for a long time. And I hope, both think and hope that during this period then humans have to sit down. We have to define ethical constraints. This is the way we want AI to go, because AI is useful. But we also have to say what we do not want. We may, for example, not want two autonomous AIs, machines that actually decide themselves what to do. So there is time for such an ethical discussion, but it also has to come.
So it's going on developing and yet limiting, right? The capacity of AI on one side, because for the things what we don't want to have them working. How do you see that AI, say, 10 years from now?
Yeah, it's very hard to say how AI will look like 10 years ago. I'm pretty confident that in 10 years, self-driving cars, for example, will be normal. Everyone will maybe be driving in self-driving cars. So I think a number of practical functions will have been taken over by AI. So if we have, but if there are AI systems or robots that can perform more general human-like tasks, that's very hard to say. I mean, it's just like the internet or the cell phones. No one could predict 30 years ago that this would come, but it did come. So who knows what it will be like? I think it's very, very hard to know.
Dr. Moser, thank you very much for wonderful conversation. And I would like to really thank you from our Mongolian audience for your time and coming to Mongolia.
Thank you very much to you too.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Thank you. За хүндэтгэгчтэй өнөөдөр манай Defacto нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор энэ тархины шинжлэх ухаанд 2014 онд Нобелийн шагнал авсан энэ алдартай доктор ноён Moser оролцлоо. Их баярлалаа.